The surveillance team planted microphones inside the walls of Hodel's mansion. For weeks, they listened and recorded conversations that hinted at something monstrous. On one tape, Hodel was heard saying, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead." In another, he mentioned performing illegal abortions, bribing police officers, and even knowing secrets about powerful men in Los Angeles. The tapes also recorded the screams of a woman and sounds described as a beating in the basement. Yet despite this chilling evidence, George Hodel was never charged. In 1950, just before the LAPD could act, he fled the country, relocating to the Philippines, conveniently beyond American jurisdiction. The Black Dahlia case slipped back into silence. Half a century later, Steve Hodel began piecing everything together: the medical expertise, the location, the psychological profile, and those tapes. He compared crime scene photographs with his father's handwriting, house layout, and connections to Elizabeth Short. Everything pointed in one direction. Steve discovered that his father had indeed been a suspect in 1947, listed among the top names in the LAPD's secret files. Even more shocking, the murder site was believed to be inside the Soden house itself. Crime scene analysts later compared photos of the house's basement with autopsy data and found they matched the killer's likely environment, large enough for dismemberment, with drains that could easily wash away blood. Steve's investigation became an obsession. He published his findings in 2003 in the best-selling book Black Dahlia Avenger, reigniting global interest in the case. He didn't stop there. He began connecting his father to other unsolved murders in Los Angeles during the 1940s and even abroad in the Philippines and Asia. Steve's research revealed eerie similarities. Women found mutilated, posed, and drained of blood, echoing the Dahlia killing. It was as if George Hodel had been perfecting his art across continents. Steve proposed a disturbing theory. His father wasn't just a killer. He was an artist in his own mind, creating human sculptures inspired by the Surrealist movement. George had moved in the same circles as avant-garde artists like Man Ray and photographer William Mortensen, men who blurred the lines between art, anatomy, and taboo. In fact, one of Man Ray's most famous photos, Minotaur, depict a woman's body severed and contorted, nearly identical to the way Elizabeth Short was found. The parallels were impossible to ignore. To George, the Black Dahlia might have been his masterpiece. Forensic analysts who revisited the Soden house years later found evidence suggesting that blood had once been present in large quantities in the basement. Tests conducted with ground-penetrating radar and luminol revealed traces consistent with human decomposition. Though too old to confirm through DNA, the results reinforced the suspicion that Elizabeth Short had been killed and dissected right there, in the home of Dr. George Hodel. And when you walk through the narrow stone halls of that house, you can almost feel it, a chilling, oppressive silence that seems to hold secrets too dark for daylight. So who is George Hodel, really? To the public, he was a charming intellectual, a doctor, a jazz musician, a lover of the arts. To those who knew him personally, he was cold, manipulative, and brilliant in the most unsettling way. He was known to brag that he had outsmarted the law. He surrounded himself with beautiful women, often younger, and treated them as curiosities rather than humans. In psychological terms, he fit the classic profile of a narcissistic psychopath, highly intelligent, devoid of empathy, and driven by control. It wasn't hard for Steve Hodel to imagine him orchestrating a murder so complex, so precise, that even the LAPD would stand in awe of its brutality. As Steve's research gained attention, critics emerged, skeptics who accused him of obsession, of seeing patterns where none existed. But even those who doubted his conclusions couldn't deny the facts. His father was a trained surgeon. He lived in Los Angeles during the murder. He was heard on tape referencing the crime. He fled the country when police closed in. For Steve, it was both a professional revelation and a personal nightmare. He wasn't just solving a cold case. He was confronting the monster who'd raised him. The Hodel family history was a labyrinth of pain. After George's death, old relatives began speaking up, sharing stories of strange rituals, cruel punishments, and hidden rooms. His daughter Tamar had lived her life scarred by what she had endured. His sons had grown distant and quiet. For Steve, every discovery felt like tearing open an old wound. He once said in an interview, "When I realized what my father might have done, I understood that the evil we chase in others can sometimes come from our own blood. Time heals nothing when truth is buried." By the dawn of the 21st century, the Black Dahlia murder was more myth than memory, an unsolved relic from a city that thrives on forgetting. But one man refused to forget. Steve Hodel, the retired LAPD detective, could not silence the ghosts of Franklin Avenue. Every lead, every clue, every photograph dragged him further down the same dark path that his father had walked half a century before. And now, the world would listen. It began quietly. In 1999, a few months after George Hodel's death, Steve submitted his findings to the LAPD cold case unit. He expected resistance, and he got it. Officers were skeptical. Many of them had grown up with the Dahlia story as folklore. Some didn't want to reopen a case tied to the department's own corruption. But when Steve presented the original police recordings, the crime scene photographs, and the handwriting analysis, something shifted. His father's name, Dr. George H. Hodel, appeared not once, but multiple times in the LAPD's confidential files from 1947 to 1950, labeled simply as top suspect. They had known. They had bugged his house. And yet, he walked free. In 2001, Steve returned to the Soden house with a small forensic team. The mansion had since become an architectural landmark, often rented for film shoots and events. Armed with luminol, they tested sections of the basement and walls. Within minutes, blue stains glowed in the darkness, faint but unmistakable. Human blood had once soaked those stones. The lab analysis was inconclusive. The samples were too old and degraded for DNA testing, but the pattern of splatter and volumes strongly suggested that a body had been dismembered there. The air inside the house felt heavy, as if the walls themselves were remembering. Through public record requests and private sources, Steve obtained over 500 pages of declassified LAPD and DA files from the 1940s. Among them were shocking memos from District Attorney Lieutenant Frank Jemison, who had led the secret investigation into George Hodel. One report read, "Dr. George Hodel is without question capable of the Black Dahlia murder. His house was under surveillance, and statements recorded indicate possible guilt." Another memo noted that several high-ranking LAPD officials had been friendly with Hodel and may have helped suppress the case. Los Angeles in the 1940s was a city run by connections, and George had many. He treated the rich, the famous, and the powerful. He knew their secrets, and that made him untouchable. To understand why the Dahlia case was never solved, one must understand the world it was born in. Post-war Los Angeles was booming, a city of movie moguls, mob ties, and moral hypocrisy. Police corruption ran deep. Officers often took bribes to protect studio executives, gangsters, or anyone with enough money. The LAPD's reputation was so tarnished that one journalist described it as a kingdom of shadows ruled by silence. If George Hodel had been arrested in 1947, he could have taken half the city down with him. And so, he wasn't. One of the photographs found in George's personal belongings became the most debated piece of evidence in modern true crime history. It showed a young woman reclining, with the same dark curls and high cheekbones as Elizabeth Short. Steve believed it was her, taken while she was still alive. Skeptics argued it was another model or a look-alike, but experts who compared facial structures noted a 96% probability that the woman was indeed Elizabeth. If true, it meant that George Hodel had known her personally, that the chance encounter so many had dismissed was real. And it meant that the monster had photographed his muse before turning her into a corpse. As Steve dug deeper, the story expanded far beyond California. George Hodel's years abroad, in the Philippines, Hawaii, and Asia, were marked by a chilling pattern of unsolved mutilation murders. One particularly disturbing case from Manila, 1967, involved a woman found dismembered and drained of blood, just like the Black Dahlia. The crime scene had strange artistic posing, too. Philippine police suspected an American doctor who lived nearby. That doctor's name? Georges Chaudet. No charges were ever filed. He left the country soon after. It was as if the same ghost that haunted Los Angeles had followed him across oceans. Steve's research uncovered at least 9 other murders in Los Angeles between 1943 and 1950 that shared eerie similarities with the Dahlia killing. Victims cut with surgical precision, bodies posed in artistic ways, cleaned and drained of blood. He began calling it the Lone Woman Murders, a string of crimes long thought unrelated. To Steve, it was a single artist's twisted portfolio, all signed with the same invisible hand. Even decades later, Hollywood could not escape her. The story inspired countless films, novels, and documentaries. L.A. Confidential, The Black Dahlia, 2006, American Horror Story, Murder House, and more. But what fascinated creators wasn't just the horror, it was the myth. Elizabeth Short had become a symbol of purity corrupted by fame, innocence consumed by ambition, beauty destroyed by power. She was the mirror image of Hollywood itself. And George Hodel? He represented its other side, the powerful men who believed they could play God and get away with it. Modern forensic psychologists who reviewed the Dahlia case described the killer as a sexually sadistic narcissist with medical knowledge, driven by dominance and artful display. The posing of the body, the precision of the cuts, and the taunting letters all pointed to a man who saw himself as superior, an artist above the law. Sound familiar? That was George Hodel to the core. Even his own children described him as a genius with no conscience. By 2013, after over a decade of research, the LAPD's cold case unit quietly acknowledged that Steve's theory was credible. Though no official statement declared the case solved, retired officers admitted off-record that the evidence was strong enough for an indictment, if the suspect were still alive. In other words, if George Hodel had been alive in 2013, the LAPD would have arrested him for the Black Dahlia murder. For Steve, that conclusion brought no comfort. Solving the murder meant condemning his own father, a man he once admired. He described it best in his memoir, "I didn't lose a father. I discovered I never truly had one." The truth had cost him sleep, peace, and family. But it gave Elizabeth Short something she had been denied for decades: a voice. Today, the site where her body was found on Norton Avenue is just another quiet suburban street. Children play. Couples walk their dogs. There's no marker, no monument, only memory. Yet those who visit say the place feels different. The wind seems colder, the silence heavier. Some claim they can still see a shadow lying in the grass when night falls. The legend endures not because of blood or horror, but because of what it says about us, how easily a dream can become a nightmare. The Black Dahlia case left behind more than mystery. It changed the way America saw its cities, its media, and its women. It revealed how quickly the press could turn a victim into a villain, how the police could bend beneath power, and how truth could hide in plain sight for half a century. Elizabeth Short wanted to be remembered, and she was just not in the way she hoped. But perhaps now, through the painful work of her story being told again, she finally is. Los Angeles never forgets. It just buries its ghost beneath new dreams. But some ghosts refuse to stay buried. Elizabeth Short, the girl who came to the city of angels seeking stardom, became the city's most haunting legend. Her name, her story, her death have outlived the glamour of the age that killed her. This is not just the end of the story. This is the part where history meets eternity. Los Angeles, 1947, a place of light and shadow. The streets glowed with movie premieres, palm trees, and broken promises. Elizabeth Short walked those streets with her heart wide open. She believed in magic, in love, in second chances. She trusted easily, smiled often, and dreamed without limits. That's what made her dangerous. Not to others, but to herself. In a city where kindness was currency and beauty was debt, innocence had no defense. After her murder, the city rushed to erase her, to turn her into a headline, a warning, a scandal. But the more they tried to forget, the more unforgettable she became. Within days of her death, newspapers coined the name the Black Dahlia. It was catchy. It sold. It made people lean closer to the morning paper. But behind that name was a young woman who laughed, who wrote letters home, who believed her big break was just one audition away. The world didn't remember her as Elizabeth Short, the daughter from Medford, Massachusetts. It remembered her as the Black Dahlia, a creation of fear and fascination. And in that transformation, Hollywood did what it does best. It turned pain into a performance. For more than 70 years, filmmakers, writers, and artists have tried to capture what really happened that January morning in 1947. Movies like The Black Dahlia, 2006, inspired by James Ellroy's noir novel, painted the city in blood and neon. TV shows such as American Horror Story, Murder House reimagined Elizabeth as a ghost who still walks Los Angeles. Each version adds something new, a theory, a vision, a confession. But none can answer the question that still burns. Why her? Maybe it was chance. Maybe it was obsession. Maybe it was the city itself, devouring its dreamers to feed its myths. For decades, true crime enthusiasts, historians, and detectives have tried to do what the LAPD never could: close the case. Each new generation brings new suspects. George Hodel, the doctor who may have killed her in his mansion. Leslie Dillon, a bellhop and aspiring writer with disturbing fantasies. Mark Hansen, the Hollywood nightclub owner who knew her well. Walter Bailey, a surgeon with uncanny anatomical precision. Theories rise and fall, suspects appear and vanish, but none have been convicted. No trial, no justice, only stories. Over the years, forensic science has advanced, but time remains the greatest enemy. DNA from the crime scene is long degraded. Witnesses are gone. Files have vanished or been destroyed. Yet even so, the pieces we do have tell a consistent tale. A killer with surgical skill, artistic cruelty, and access to privacy. Someone who wanted to be seen, even in their absence. The cuts, the pose, the perfection of the dismemberment, these weren't random acts of rage. They were composition. This wasn't just murder. It was performance. Why does the Black Dahlia story still echo long after other cases have faded? Because it's more than a murder mystery. It's a mirror. It reflects our endless hunger for beauty, fame, and tragedy. It forces us to confront the dark underbelly of glamour, the price paid by those who dare to dream. Every generation finds itself drawn back to her, like moths to a black flame. Elizabeth's mother, Phoebe Short, lived until 1992. She never stopped believing that her daughter's name would one day be clear to the scandal. In letters, she spoke of Betty as kind, imaginative, and deeply trusting. She hated how the press painted her as a loose woman, how they twisted her daughter's life into lurid fiction. To Phoebe, Elizabeth wasn't the Black Dahlia. She was a daughter who loved movies, adored soldiers, and dreamed of acting. Even decades later, Elizabeth's surviving relatives have called for her to be remembered not as a victim, but as a person. In interviews near the end of his life, Steve Hodel said he felt both triumph and tragedy in solving his father's secret. He believed George Hodel was responsible not only for the Black Dahlia murder, but for multiple other killings. And though the LAPD never officially confirmed it, the evidence and the fear was enough. My father wanted immortality, Steve said. He got it, but not the kind he wanted. He also expressed empathy for Elizabeth Short, calling her the woman whose story became my curse. To this day, his research remains one of the most extensive independent investigations into any unsolved crime in American history. At 3825 Norton Avenue, where Elizabeth's body was discovered, there's nothing to suggest what once happened there. No plaque, no memorial, no flowers, just a quiet patch of grass beneath the sun. But every January, people still visit, some bringing flowers, others cameras, and some simply silence. They stand there for a moment and remember. Not the gore, not the myth, but the woman who never got her dream. And in that moment, Los Angeles remembers too. Over the decades, Elizabeth Short's story evolved into something larger than any single person. To feminists, she represents society's treatment of women, adored when beautiful, discarded when inconvenient. To artists, she's the ultimate muse, tragic, mysterious, eternal. To true crime historians, she's the reminder that even the perfect crime leaves scars on the world. She became the face of a new kind of American horror, not a monster in the dark, but the darkness within ourselves. Legends grow because we need them to, and perhaps, deep down, people want the Black Dahlia mystery to remain unsolved. Because once you solve a mystery, it loses its magic. Once you name the monster, the story ends. But the Black Dahlia isn't just a story about death. It's about longing, beauty, and how easily both can be destroyed. And as long as people dream of fame in the City of Angels, her ghost will linger, a silent warning whispered in the glittering night. Imagine her now, standing in front of a studio mirror, adjusting her hair, reciting her lines, before the city swallowed her whole. She had no idea she would become a legend. No idea that her death would outshine every movie she ever hoped to star in. But perhaps, somewhere beyond time, Elizabeth Short finally got what she wanted, to be remembered. Not as a victim, not as a scandal, but as the eternal Black Dahlia, a flower that never truly wilts. The Black Dahlia story is more than a crime. It's a parable of the human heart, how beauty attracts darkness, how ambition courts danger, and how the line between art and evil can blur beyond recognition. In every retelling, she lives again. In every film, every whisper, every photograph, her face looks back, pale, perfect, and timeless. Because Los Angeles doesn't bury its dreams. It preserves them in neon, in fame, in tragedy. And among them all, one dream still floats above the rest. The dream of a girl who came to be seen and was never unseen again.